Hi, welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by me, Janine Turner,
and Cathy Gillespie,
with students
Dakare, Chatman,
and me, Tova, Kaplan.
Join us as we discuss hot topic issues with constitutional experts. It's sponsored by Constituting America.
Hi, I'm Janine Turner. Welcome to Constitutional Chats, co-hosted with Cathy Gillespie, Tova Love Kaplan, and Dakare Chatman. Today, our hot topic is the preamble to the Constitution. We've been breaking down the Constitution for the past 7 weeks, and today it is the preamble and almost 7 weeks because we put a couple together. Today is the preamble and the Constitutional Convention, so it should be quite informational and exciting. And as I said, our constitutional expert is Mr. James Best. So I'm going to introduce the team. I'm an actress, Janine Turner. You can find out all about that at JanineTurner.com, but I'm also the founder and co-president of Constituting America. So welcome. So I'm going to tell you about Tova. Tova is an extraordinary young woman. She is the president of our Constituting America National Youth Advisory Board. She runs it like a CEO of a top 100 company in America. Watch out for her. She is going to rule the world someday. I am certain of it. And she's won our contest 3 times for PSA. Originally it was for marketing plan. Then it was PSA. And now most recently her app. Tova, say hello.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for joining us. I just wanted to briefly talk about our book club, which is still going on. We have in our middle school, high school, and adult category, we're reading Miracle at Philadelphia, having some really great discussions on our Facebook page about that book, as well as we're going to be having a live discussion about the book. It's not too late to get in on it, but you can find information on our Facebook page or on our website. Also for elementary school, we read Camilla Can Vote, and now we're reading We Elect a President. So please check out information on that. And thank you again for joining us today.
And where is that on the website exactly? To find out about the book club, Cathy? Because what, Lisa? Yes.
Oh, sorry.
You
can find it in the same section as where you would sign up for the constitutional chats. So we have all of our upcoming stuff, including our Constitution Day program and those book clubs, all in the same section on the homepage.
On the homepage. Okay. Websites blur my brain. Cathy, I went to Tova first. I'm sorry. It's one of those days. But Cathy is co-president of Constituting America. Didn't mean to skip you over there, Cathy. I like to say that it takes a bird has to have a right wing and a left wing to fly. It has to have 2 wings to fly. And without Cathy, this operation would not be flying and soaring like it is. She's a world's best friend anybody could ever have. And we're co-presidents, and for 10 years now, we've been working on this project. So Constituting America. Cathy, say hello.
Hi, everybody. We're glad that you're here. And I'm always glad to defer to Tova, for sure. We just want to thank our sponsors today, Bill Stonecker and Tricia Wilson, for sponsoring this constitutional chat. Bill and Tricia are 2 great longtime friends of Constituting America, 2 great Americans, and they just do so many wonderful things for their community. And I remember Bill came to our Founding Father panel that we had in Southlake, Texas a few years ago and really enjoyed that. And Bill and Tricia, we just thank you very much for sponsoring this chat today. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I want to introduce Dakare Chatman, who's phoning in from the set. He's phoning in from the trailer of this. I'll let him tell us about where he is today. But he's tired of taking COVID tests, he was telling us. But Dakare Chatman is extraordinary as well. You're going to see Tova and Dakare. Tova's going to be running some CEO company or the government, and Dakare is going to be winning Oscars and Tonys. So these 2 just rock, and they're amazing. Dakare Chatman's won our contest twice. Once for PSA and the second time for short film. Both are available at constitutingamerica.org, are as Tova's winning projects. He is our student ambassador. He's just incredible. And the billboard, we have billboards all over the country with his face on it, saying it's an American thing, so know it or it's an American thing, so learn it, which was his phrase. It was his invention. And he's a working actor. We most recently seen on HBO's The Righteous Gemstones and Netflix's Outer Banks. Dakare, welcome to the show. I know you want to be a politician someday too, but you're going to become an actor first, sort of like Reagan, and then you can become the president. You know, you and Tova will be vying for presidency, I'm sure. Dakare, tell us where you are on your set.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. I'm currently doing Outer Banks in Charleston, South Carolina. And yes, I am getting very much tired of taking COVID tests. I had 5 last week, and this week I've started out with 3, so at least lower than 5, right? But we're getting some storms here, so that's why you don't see my face, but I'm so glad to be here. And I thank Cathy and I don't want to butcher their name, but our sponsors for this chat. Thank you guys so much for being here. And I want to let all of you know that me and Tova will not be vying for presidency, because I'll just be one of her little peons in the background and let her be the president.
Well, you'll be clutching your like armful of Emmys and Oscars, and I just hope that when you start directing movies, you'll put me in them, and I can have some sort of late career rebound. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce our special guest. Yoo-hoo, Mr. James Best. That rhymes. He is the premier expert on this subject, because listen to his bio. He is the author of many books, including the best-selling Steve Dancy Tales and our favorite Tempest at Dawn, a classic novelization of the Constitutional Convention, which he donates each year to Constituting America's auction. We have 4 auctions a year, or 3 auctions a year, 4, I think. Mr. Best is also the author of The Shut Mouth Society, a modern day fiction thriller based on the discovery of a secret historical Abraham Lincoln document. Woo! Such a wonderful way to learn about our founding documents. He writes them in very interesting ways. We first met Mr. Best in 2010, and he's gone on to write essays in every one of our 90-day studies, which I think we've had 9 so far. He's written more than 27 essays for Constituting America in the past 10 years. Thank you, Mr. Best. In addition to being a best-selling author, Mr. Best is a sought-after speaker and enjoys film, surfing, skiing, though he's in Nebraska right now, so I don't know how he's going to do the surfing, and watching his grandchildren. Mr. Best splits his time between Omaha, San Diego, and New York City. Mr. Best, thank you for joining us again at Constitutional Chats.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, and you're in Nebraska right now, yes? In
yes,
Omaha?
right. And we're starting to get be fall. It's starting early this year.
Yeah, Texas too. It just boom happened after Labor Day, and that never happens in Texas. You know, we still have 100-degree days in September and October. So we every day the neighbors and I are saying to each other, "Is this going to last? Is this going to last?" But yeah, Labor Day, and it was 80. So, Mr. Best, we're going to get started with all of our questions, and we're going to give you you're going to give us a prelude of the preamble and the Constitutional Convention, and we're going to take your questions from the audience today too. Mr. Best, you are on. It is your time to shine.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, maybe start with what was the purpose of the preamble, and it definitely wasn't part of the law. And the Supreme Court in Jacobson versus Massachusetts in 1905 actually had a ruling that it did not impart powers. If I can, just to read this, the court said, this is the Supreme Court, the United States does not derive any of its substantive powers from the preamble of the Constitution. It cannot exert any power to secure and declare objects of the Constitution unless, apart from the preamble, such power can be found or can properly be implied from some express delegation in the instrument. So the preamble of the Constitution is not, doesn't impart a lot of legal authority. A lot of people would like the general welfare portion of it to actually impart more authority to Congress than the founders wanted. So what was its purpose? And it's my opinion that it was a sales pitch. It is, for lack of a better term, the elevator pitch to sell the rest of the document to the delegates in the convention who had yet to vote on it and pass it, and then to the ratifying committees and to the general populace. And the general populace debated the Constitution in taverns, churches, family living rooms for about 2 years. I mean, it was the topic of conversation throughout the United States. And so if you look at the preamble as the sales pitch, it makes a lot more sense, or makes a lot of sense. One of the things that people kind of question is, what does it mean to form a more perfect union? Well, 4 of the authors of the Articles of Confederation were actually in the delegation at the Constitutional Convention. And Congress was going to be the first party that would have action to take with the Constitution. And the one thing they did not want to do is offend or insult the people who had wrote the articles. So they didn't want to say the articles are crummy, so we're writing this. So instead they said, in order to form a more perfect union, and it was actually very far from perfect, and it was just a diplomatic way of pushing the sale. Also the tranquility and justice. That was a very clever set of proposals, because the Shays Revolt and other uprisings that were occurring throughout the United States, there were 2 contingents. One felt that they did not have justice. They were foreclosing about, I think they said as many as 1/5 of the farms, small farms in most of the states, were being foreclosed on. And that didn't feel like justice. And so instead in response, they were revolting, armed revolts. And so the domestic tranquility, so they were appealing to both sides with those words. So I think that a lot of what the preamble was to sell this to the states. And then a lot of people talk about how the first part of the preamble, it used to read, there were 3 committees. There's a committee of detail, a committee of unresolved issues, and then a committee of style. And Gouverneur Morris was a member of the committee of style, and he volunteered to take home the work from the other committees and the whole convention and try and put some sense around it, put the words together. And he's credited with changing it. It originally said, "We the people of Maine, New Hampshire," and went through the whole 13 states. And I think he changed that for 4 reasons. The first was the Constitution had not even been approved by the convention yet. And if New York, who was absent, had returned, they would have voted against it. So putting their name, "We the people of New York," would have been disingenuous. So they took the names out partly because they didn't know who was going to vote for it in the convention, and they didn't know which states would ratify it. Second reason is that Gouverneur Morris was a nationalist, and some people, some historians claim that he surreptitiously changed the wording to give it a more nationalist bent, except that he didn't do anything that the convention had already decided to do. The convention had already decided they were going to bypass the state legislature, bypass Congress under the articles, and tell them to send it directly to the states with no delay, meaning no review. And then the states, instead of the state legislatures approving it, it would be conventions of the people. So they had already decided to do this. So when Governor Morris said, "We the people of the United States," those famous 7 words, and the "we the people" in outsized letters, I think was echoing also. I believe that the Constitution was the finalization or the greatest achievement of the Enlightenment period. And one of the precepts of the Enlightenment was that power resided with the people and could only be delegated from the people to their government. And so I think that's another reason for the outsized words, "we the people," and why he changed it from the states to the people. And then the last reason, I believe, is Gouverneur Morris was a very eloquent writer. He changed a lot of the other wording to make it smoother and sing. And I don't know if you could have made a song out of the original wording, but he probably also thought that listening to the states was very ineloquent and wouldn't go for that. The convention itself lasted 4 months. It was very first action that the convention took was to vote that it would be secret. That meant they nailed down the windows, literally. They posted guards, sentries, outside the windows to make sure nobody tried to hang out there and overhear what was going on inside. And there were a few yelling matches, so they probably could have heard through the glass. And it was a very hot room. Now, there were 55 people, delegates to the convention, but people came and went. And probably at the most, there was 35 at any particular time. But it was a very hot summer in Philadelphia, and they had to sit in this room with closed off, no ventilation, no air moving. And at one point in time, they even had an influx or an infestation of houseflies that was inside the chamber. So it was a very difficult environment to go to work to every single day. And yet they stayed. It almost collapsed several times. I would give the credit to Benjamin Franklin and George Washington for holding it together, sort of the senior diplomats. And what they came out with at the end, I think, was something very beautiful. It was born on September 17th, 1787, which we'll celebrate with a day-long constitutional chat on Thursday.
Well, that was fascinating. And I'm going to go to Dakare first after I make a few comments, because he may get, ushered out of his trailer to go work on set. So prepare, Dakare. That was fascinating. Was that more perfect union, what you said about that was really interesting. About originally he was going to name the states and that he didn't. But was with the Shays Rebellion, what part of the preamble was that? Is established justice, those two words?
I think established justice and ensure domestic tranquility. The combination
Domestic
of the
tranquility,
two,
yeah.
kind of appealed to both sides of that issue. The people who felt it was injustice and the people who wanted them to quit the uprisings.
Interesting. Yeah, see, that's why history is so fascinating, because you can look at a document that's still pertinent for today and then mirror it with history and what was going on, which were these riots, and they wanted to establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility. That's really fascinating. But I also think that when he was going to list all the colonies, but he didn't, because because of the New York and what state was going to be, our colony was going to be a part of this. But you reiterated something that's really interesting, that in order to ratify the Constitution, they didn't even let Congress do it. They didn't let the current Congress ratify the new Constitution. And they wouldn't even let the states ratify, the state legislatures ratify the Constitution. I didn't really realize that. They all had to call their own convention of states in each state to ratify it. I should know this, but I'm going to be just transparent and say I had never really put two and two together. It was not the state legislatures did not do it, and the actual Congress at the time wasn't allowed to do it. They called their own conventions to ratify in each state.
Yes. Yeah, each convention was instructed in probably the most audacious letter ever written. There's a letter that came to Congress from the Constitutional Convention telling them exactly what to do. So they were chartered by the Congress, and in the end, they gave orders to the Congress on how to actually ratify and implement the new government once it was approved. But yes, they were not state legislatures, but they were conventions of the people, so they were comprised separately. Now, a lot of the people who got elected to, and they were done differently in each state, a lot of the people who got elected to the conventions of the people were also in the state legislature. So they weren't excluded, but they had to be elected again.
Yeah, I'm looking here in Article 7, the ratification of the conventions of 9 states, which is what they needed, shall be sufficient for establishment of this Constitution between the states, so ratifying the same. Done in convention by the unanimous consent of the states present on the 7th. Oh, wait, no. On the 17th day of September. That's where they wrote that they're just establishing that's when they wrote it. So it doesn't really say in the Constitution, actually, that that had to be a convention of states. You just mentioned a letter. There was a letter.
Yeah, there's a letter that followed the Constitution, which told them actually that they would elect the Congress first, and then the Congress, then they would elect the president, and then they would appoint the Supreme Court. So I actually went through the steps on how to get from the Articles of Confederation to the new government under the Constitution.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, it does say the ratification of conventions of 9 states. So it does say they're conventions of 9 states. Yeah, fascinating. We learn more every day. Okay, and I do agree with Benjamin Franklin and George Washington. I'll just say I am going to also it's in our book club. Our next book after Miracle of Philadelphia is Ron Chernow's George Washington. So I hope everyone joins us in reading it. That's a mind-boggling book. Everyone should read it about George Washington. It's very honest, looks at both sides of him. But he was so concerned after what he experienced in the war, where he had this ragtag group of people coming from all these different colonies with no sense of unity. Every colony was like a country, and he had to find a way to unify the colonies and this ragtag, militias coming from with no matching uniforms. Every day, everybody had a different train of thought, and they all brought their wives and their children. It was just this kind of campground, and he had to figure out a way to unify everybody. And he realized that was happening with the states too. If we didn't unify the states from a legal standpoint and how to govern, it was going to be the same problem. We wouldn't win the war of actual war, and the war of finding a way for the people to govern themselves. Okay, Dakare, Chatman, you're up.
Hey everyone, thanks Janine. I am so glad that you said that because I have no idea what's going to happen. I really like when you spoke about, about it being an elevator speech when you mentioned that. Because, when I first walked into civics class, it was kind of like, okay, we're going to talk about the Constitution. And the first thing she said was, okay, we're going to do the preamble and everyone's going to memorize it. And we're going to get up in front of the class and it's going to be a grade and everybody's going to say the preamble. But she never, kind of gave like a background. So I'm glad you did that. And I was going to ask you if you would kind of tell me why they so heavily in school focused on just the preamble, because I believe we spent like 3 or 4 weeks in the preamble just getting everyone to get up and say it. And I don't believe I ever got the knowledge of its importance. And, they really focus on that rather than all the articles of the Constitution.
Well, I didn't actually know that they didn't teach the entire Constitution and focus more on the preamble. I presume it's a very eloquently written, uplifting kind of short narrative, and I think that teachers like to teach it because they can teach some of the positive aspects of at least our aspirations for society. Because the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence plus that paragraph do summarize a lot of what I consider to be the founding principles. So the rest of it's mechanics, probably not as exciting for children to learn.
Important, which is why we have Constitution America, to understand not just
right.
This is how the government works, but this is how you apply it to your life, and this is how you use it in your life. And it's actually there for you to utilize because we govern them and tell them what to do. And so it's so important. I do want to go back to I'm gonna go to Cathy next and then Tova. This implied what the Supreme Court said. Can you go back to that when the Supreme Court ruled on the fact that the preamble was not law, which they certainly should teach kids, and I know they don't. They said there was one section in there that you said implied. Can you read that again?
Yes.
With the Supreme Court synopsis that you read earlier?
Yeah, it cannot exert any power to secure the declarative objects of the Constitution unless, apart from the preamble, such power can be found in or properly implied from, and that's what a lot of people disagree with on the interpretation of the Constitution by the Supreme Court. Some express delegation in the instrument. So they're saying it's either got to be found in there or we as a Supreme Court can imply it. And I don't agree with as much.
Imply what? What can they imply?
Powers.
That from the preamble?
Oh no, it says apart from the preamble, such powers can be found or properly implied from express delegation. So it's from the list of powers, if it can be implied from that or specifically stated.
Okay, so they are saying that it's the preamble, there's nothing that can come from the preamble.
Nothing,
it has to be within
nothing.
what's delegated in the actual mechanisms of the actual articles.
Correct.
Okay, very good. All right, Kathy.
Oh, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
This case, this was the first words in the case, and I knew it was there. In fact, I think your guest last week mentioned it, but I didn't realize that is actually a court case on the mandatory nature of vaccinations in 1905. And I don't know why they opened that case with that statement, but it must have been the people who are arguing against mandatory vaccinations must have tried to use the preamble to argue against the police powers.
The police powers or vaccinations?
Well, yeah, they called it police powers, but vaccinations were authorized or found to be legal under the state's police power capabilities.
Oh. And they tried to, so they got, in other words, don't ever try to use the preamble to justify anything in court because you're going to get shot down
Exactly.
by the judge. And we did a white paper at Constituting America, actually going in and following up with, I think it was, I believe it was in when the election of 2010, the next session started after that, they had a new ruling, which shouldn't have been a new ruling, but the ruling was that you have to, when you put a bill in the hopper to go to committee to see if it's going to make it to a vote or to the floor to be fleshed out and established, they had to prove and attach, this is really cool for Dakare and Tova to know, they had to attach the where in the Constitution they had the powers, that they were given those powers to write that kind of bill. In other words, is the bill constitutional? But there was really no follow-up with it. You know, no one, what we realized in our white papers, they didn't really make sure people had actually done that. But what a lot of people tried to do was justify their current idea for a bill that they put in the hopper that would go to committee. They tried to justify it with the preamble. So many of our representatives didn't even realize that the preamble is not even law. And you can't even justify an upcoming bill or potential for proposal for a bill with the preamble. So that was one of the revelations of our white paper. Okay, Kathy, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Best. And this has been fascinating as usual. And as Tova mentioned, we're currently reading Miracle at Philadelphia as part of our Constituting America book club. And one of the things that I really found fascinating in that book that I had never heard really before is that Alexander Hamilton was one of the most driving voices and forces as far as getting the momentum going to hold a constitutional convention. And I guess, you know, whoever has seen Hamilton knows how persistent he was and how hard he worked, but it said, you know, he made speeches and wrote letters and just harangued everyone to death until it finally got going. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the whole Constitutional Convention did get going, get off the ground, because it must have been hard to get a consensus for everyone to want to do that.
Well, first off, there was a attempted convention in Annapolis the year before, and it failed for lack of a quorum. So there had to be a majority of the states there, and they didn't show up. And Hamilton and Madison actually made a pact at that convention to work tirelessly. I mean, they both worked tirelessly to promote another convention the following year in Philadelphia. And so they harangued everyone and made a nuisance of themselves. People got tired of hearing about it. And one of the people who got the most tired is that Madison got even Jefferson from France to write Washington a letter, and Washington was inundated with requests that he attend. And they knew if they could get George Washington just to attend, that then he would, the rest of the states would come because he had that much stature. So when he agreed to come, that's what brought everyone together. And Hamilton, of course, was one of the people beseeching Washington, was his aide throughout the war, or through most of the war, and was a very strong follower of Washington. So he also participated heavily in getting him there. Then when he got there, then they connived to get him to be president of the convention. And that had if I take it a quick aside, the Society of Cincinnati was retired officers from the Revolutionary War. And with the Shays Revolt and the country ready to fall into anarchy, there was a threat that the sons of, that they would actually have a military coup attempt. And George Washington had been president of the Cincinnati. And as president of the convention, they knew that that would hold off the Cincinnati and they would be patient until the end to see what came about. So it had a couple of very strong purposes of getting Washington there. That answer the question?
It did. And the second part of my question was how it was set up, because I found it interesting. If I read it correctly, states could send as many delegates as they wanted to.
Yes.
That seems strange to me.
But the rules were one vote per state. Okay. So if you had an even number of delegates to a state, there were times when that state didn't get a vote because the two delegates would go in opposite directions. So most of the states tried to have an odd number. In New York's case, Hamilton was a strong proponent of the convention and everything else. The New York governor, Clinton, was against it, and he stacked the other people so they would always outvote Hamilton. So New York was never either on the small state or large state, slavery, anti-slavery, all the various divisions that occurred. New York tried to play the middle.
Okay. And if I could ask just one more question, because we have a question from our listener, Father Michael Bishop, who asked, did John Adams play a big role here? And he said, I'm thinking of the movie 1776, and I remember the chorus singing, "Sit down, John." The movie was great, fun, and educational. I saw it in the 1970s, I think. Can you talk a little bit about John Adams' role?
Well, I'll just interject with that really quick, since I'm a John Adams. I love John Adams. That was for our, who is it who asked that question?
Father Michael Bishop.
Okay, for Father Bishop, Michael Bishop. That was, I love the movie 1776, and we actually need to do one about the convention. I mean, that's probably our next big project, right, Cathy and Tova and Lisa? We need to do that. But that was for the Declaration of Independence. That was for the Continental Congress when John Adams was so incredibly pivotal. And without John Adams, we would not have had a Declaration of Independence. Because he was a thorn in the side for that, we would not have had Thomas Jefferson writing the Declaration of Independence, and we would not have had George Washington as our general. So John Adams is a hero as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, talk about that. He wasn't around. He was in England, right, Mr. Best, during the Constitutional Convention, but he wrote letters.
He wrote letters, and he was in England, and Jefferson was in France. But more important, Adams wrote a book, and I can't remember the title of it, but it was something along the lines of an analysis of the constitutions of the states of America. And he went through, and it was a very scholarly look at the 13 state constitutions and the Article of Confederation. And that book was read by almost every member of the Constitutional Convention. So he was there in his intellect.
Gosh, I just wish we had leaders that would be that well read, and it's all of our leaders have become sort of like tweets. And they operate like a tweet. Let me get a 1 sentence, 10-word synopsis of what I'm supposed to know and vote on. And that's part of our problem. Oh, I wish we had leaders that were that scholarly, that would read an entire book before they actually voted on something. Okay, Tova, you're on.
Thank you. This has been really fascinating. It's interesting that two of the biggest declarations of what our country stands for were written really close to each other. So I think of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and then the preamble to the Constitution during the Constitutional Convention. I think when people think of the big statements that define America, those are two of the main things people think of. And they were written, I was just wondering if you could talk about what differences in language there were between both of the statements, because it was a relatively short amount of time, but a lot had happened in between. You were talking about all of the rebellions, and of course the war happened. So what are the differences in like rhetoric and language between the Declaration of Independence and the preamble to the Constitution? And what are some of the historical reasons that might be, or political reasons?
Well, I think the Declaration of Independence was more aspirational, and it was literally the Declaration of Independence itself was a list of complaints they had against the Crown, but the preamble, or the lead paragraph that we all know, was more to incite the populace to support independence. And so I think it was very inspirational, or meant to be aspirational and inspirational. The Constitution now was done not in passion, like going to war for independence, but was actually where people were going to sit down and debate a more serious kind of effort and figure out what the best type of government to preserve liberty would be. And so I think the language is a little, in my opinion, a little more formal in the Constitution, and I think that's befitting the document itself. So they were both launch pads for the documents they were supporting, and so they had to launch them in different manners.
And then could you talk more about the different, I find it fascinating hearing about the different disagreements that people had to compromise when writing the preamble. So could you discuss more of those and how it influenced this very famous document?
On the Constitution, actually, the Gouverneur Morris, who wrote the preamble, and then he presented it to the full committee of style, which included Alexander Hamilton and Madison, and Rufus King and Johnson, I think it was. Anyways, they made very few edits to it. And then when it went to the full Congress, they made very few edits to it. So the preamble that he wrote was not controversial at all that I'm aware of within the Constitutional Convention. Even the changes that he made, he was handed a preamble in from the Committee of Detail, and it was clunky. But when he changed it, he just made it more articulate, and it made it more appropriate to actually create a song out of. So I don't know what controversy you're thinking of, but I will say one thing, if I can quickly. The committee that wrote the Declaration of Independence, there was the top best-selling author on that committee, and he did not write the Declaration of Independence, and that was Benjamin Franklin. Other than the Bible, had the best-selling book for 24 years, Poor Richard's Almanac. And when Jefferson asked him why he didn't write it, why he didn't volunteer, Benjamin Franklin told him, "I don't write things that are going to be edited by a committee."
Well, yes, and that's great. There's a whole song about that in 1776, the musical, which I'm sure our father, Bishop, knows. Yeah, that's really true. And Tova, I harken back to your question, because it was about 11 years from 1776 so it's a good question, to 1787 is, kind of, I guess, when they started this. But Abraham Lincoln talks about the Declaration of Independence as the golden apple. I mean, it was what established life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We get our rights from our creator, and we govern from the government and all that. So that kind of established our goal, our thesis. And then the Constitution is the frame that upholds that. You've heard that 1,000 times, Tova. Okay, ask some more questions, Tova.
I guess, I know I was reading Miracle at Philadelphia, like Cathy is. And I know you mentioned this a little bit about Shays Rebellion and all the different rebellions that were happening, but the book I was reading really emphasized that was a driving force behind a lot of the policies that were being shaped. This fear of, people rejecting the government and rising up against it. And I know you talked a little bit about how those fears influenced some of the language in the preamble, but could you talk more about how that shaped the Constitutional Convention and how it shaped the ideas in the preamble?
Yeah, well, the first thing I said that it was very important George Washington was there because he drew in the states so he could get a quorum. But Shays probably was as important as Washington, because that was another reason that people, unlike the year before, actually came to the convention and they were able to get a quorum of states. So it did scare people that these rebellions were occurring. And it was also scaring people that the British had not left the forts on our northern border, and they had promised to in the Paris Peace Accord, their peace agreement. And the Spanish were in the south, in Florida, and the southwest of the 13 states, causing havoc. And then the French were to the west. So the three major powers in the world were literally waiting for us to collapse so they could come in and reclaim or carve off pieces. So the Shays revolt and the disharmony that was occurring within the country, and the fact that there were 13 different currencies. Every state had their own currency, so you couldn't do commerce very easily. Those things drove people finally realize we got to fix this, and so the states did authorize delegations to the convention.
You know, and I'll piggyback on that, and we'll close here because I know everyone kind of said, well, let's go ahead and close too. But the Shays Rebellion, because what's interesting to piggyback on Tova's question is Shays Rebellion was about what? Explain to everybody what Shays Rebellion was, what the subject matter was.
It was about a couple of things, but mainly it was not being able to pay their mortgage payments and getting foreclosed on their properties. Part of the reason for this is they were not paid their wages for serving in the Continental Army during the Revolution. And that's one of the things that the convention and then Hamilton, especially the Secretary of Treasury, addressed in Washington's first administration, was to settle the money issues and get the money back out that was owed to these soldiers. The other thing is people like Roger Sherman invested his entire fortune, which wasn't large, he wasn't a rich man, in war bonds, and those weren't being paid back either. So the government was not living up to its obligations, and that was causing the rest of the populace then not to be able to pay their bills.
So see, Tova, that is, I wanted to kind of explore that a little bit because it all comes down to money, okay? And, you know, it just does. You know, people vote their pocketbook and the economy. And under the Articles of Confederation, they could not raise enough money. They couldn't pay back their loans. They couldn't pay the soldiers because there was they all had to have unanimous votes, and there was no power with the Articles of Confederation to be able to raise any money to get out of their debt. So I think that was one of the driving forces. The Shays Rebellion was all about the money, and one of the things the Constitution did was figure out a way to have a nationalized currency, and then Hamilton had his wonderful idea about getting people out of their debt. So I think it's pretty funny how the economy always drives everything. We want to show a song by our first song winner, Jacob Wood. And we re-recorded this song with him. He sent us it was so exciting to hear his voice our first year contest and entries in 2010. And now it is actually, we hire a company out of Nashville to promote the song. Cathy, tell us the stats. It's like the number 5 downloaded song right now or something fantastic.
It's the number 4 downloaded song on Play MPE's download streaming platform. And it's already been out on, I think, like about 5 or 6 different radio stations and is getting lots of spins, and is just going to keep building here in the next few days, we're sure. So you can find it on anywhere where you like to stream your music. Just search These Precious Words, Constituting America, Spotify, iTunes, and you'll find it and play it.
Action.
People of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice and secure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, strive for liberty and provides a chance for you and me. These precious words are what form this glorious nation, and are the flesh and bones of our dreams. Those rules and commandments are what keep America free. Yeah, that's what the Constitution means to me. I'm free to laugh, I'm free to sing, I'm free to live the life I believe. I'm free to stand, I'm free to speak, I'm free to fight for what I believe. These precious words are what form this glorious nation, and are the flesh and bones of a large dream. These laws, rules, and commandments are what keep America free. That's what the Constitution means to me.
Mr. Best, really, really informative. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed it.